if Arnold releases a book called The Physics of Resistance Exercise, and he says that he thought he knew which exercises to do back then until he looked at it from a biomechanical point of view and came to conclusion that this makes more sense and recommends training this way for muscle building. How will this impact the fitness industry today?
Well, it's a very good question. Let me first say that I have a client who's, well, he's retired now. He's 92 years old. Mace Neufeld is a former movie producer. And he is friendly with Arnold, and he sent Arnold my book. So Arnold has my book. Now, I don't know whether he's read it or not. And of course, Mace doesn't know whether he's read it or not. I suspect Arnold probably hasn't read it. And there's two reasons I suspect that. One is he's probably got a lot to do. He's probably very busy. And he probably thinks that he already knows how to train. And the evidence of that is that he developed this fantastic physique and he won these trophies and blah, blah, blah. And of course, I'm not saying that what he did didn't build that physique. It obviously did. What I'm suggesting is that he could have built that physique or better, perhaps better, but certainly with less wasted effort and less wasted time and less risk of injury. That's what we're about. Now, if he were to have read it and were to come out and say, you know, I've read this book and it's fantastic and this is the best way to train, it would certainly be fantastic for the industry because people believe what he says. And they believe what he says because people tend to believe people that have been in the trenches more than they believe scholars. Now, that doesn't mean that a scholar, you know, sometimes scholars know best. And I'm sort of, I guess you could say I'm sort of part of each. I'm kind of a scholar, but I'm also a competitive bodybuilder, a former competitive bodybuilder. What
does it say on your business card?
Oh, it says bodybuilder on the outside, science nerd on the inside. Yeah. So, but you know, obviously people have a lot of faith in people that have demonstrated what works. So that's the problem, is that people will look at Arnold and they would say that what Arnold did back then, which is in some ways, many ways different than what we're recommending, that is proof that those exercises are the best. I would say, as I've said many times, no, it's not proof that they're the best. It proves that they worked well enough, right? So if I arrive at a destination, but I took a really rough road to get there, doesn't mean I took the best road, right? Doesn't mean that the road I took was the only road, right? It means that I got there and it was good enough. The road was good enough to allow me to arrive, but there might be another road or two or three other roads that could have gotten me there with less wear and tear, less abuse, less time, etc. So for better or for worse, there are people out there that are more likely to believe Arnold, what Arnold is saying, than what I'm saying, just because I never got to the Mr. Olympia level. And that's, you know, but the good news is that they believe what I say more than if I'd never competed, right? If I was just a PhD in biomechanics and was saying what I'm saying right now, they would say, yeah, but that's just nonsense. It's just theoretical. Yeah. No, it's, you know, I mean, I'm doing it now and I'm enjoying my training much more than I enjoyed it back then. But by the way, I mean, you might have seen this too. On Facebook, I posted a picture of me doing a 2-arm cable pull-in in my 20s.
Yes.
I might have been 31 at that point. And someone said, you know, what is that? And I said, well, that was me on the way to discovering that a pull in, down and in, is the better direction of resistance and the better anatomical motion. But I hadn't gotten yet to the point where I realized that I needed to rotate toward it, and I can't rotate in the opposite directions at the same time. So yeah, I was discovering early on that the things that I'm teaching now, the things that we're teaching now, are truly better directions of anatomical motions, better directions of resistance than most of the conventional methods.
And do you think it will be a shock for people to hear him changing his mind after like his early years? How will they take it?
Well, I think there's some people that would love it. I think there's some people that would maybe disagree because to some degree, Arnold has flip-flopped on a couple of things that have made now people believe that he says what he says for political reasons or for commercial reasons. I mean, one example of that is, you might see that he has appeared in this Game Changers movie, where he is now saying that that plant-based is the best way to train. And he goes so far as to say that what he was doing before, which was promoting protein supplements, was just for commercial reasons. Well, indirectly what he's saying is, I was lying back then, but now I'm telling you the truth. So obviously someone who would be listening to that say, well, if you lied to us then, why wouldn't you be lying to us now? Or maybe you didn't lie to us then, but you are lying to us now. Right? But either way, the point is that he has done some things and said some things that now make people wonder whether or not he's 100% honest in his recommendations. But nevertheless, there are still people that think that anything Arnold says and recommends is gold. Now, I will say that I have been watching videos of Sylvester Stallone working out for years, and I always thought, oh my God, he is so beating himself up unnecessarily. He was doing, chin-ups with weight hanging around his waist. And by the way, we're talking about a guy who is at this point is, 70, right? We're not talking about a guy who's 20, right? So God, I wouldn't recommend a 20-year-old doing chin-ups with weight hang. I mean, even though I did back then, I didn't know well enough, but certainly a 70-year-old should not be doing that. And leg raises with weight hanging off of his ankles. Knowing what I know about biomechanics, I cringed watching him do that. Now he's coming out and recommending a new trainer's methods. And I don't recommend that other trainer's methods. I think that other trainer's methods are not quite correct. In fact, not nearly quite correct. But the point is that whatever it is easier on Sylvester Stallone's body than what he was doing before. And now he is recommending this other trainer. So it is possible for people who have built a reputation for theoretically knowing how to work out to then later say, well, maybe I wasn't right. Maybe there's a better way. Or maybe what he's saying is, this wouldn't have worked for me back then, but it works for me now because now I have all these injuries and aches and pains. And so, but yes, I would love it if Sylvester Stallone or Jean-Claude Van Damme or Arnold Schwarzenegger would read our material, try it, and see how sensible it is, how much better it feels, and realize this is what I should have been doing all along. I would love to see them do that.
Sylvester Stallone worked out in the early years with Franco Colombo. So he learned like few things from them. Actually, I think when he was getting him ready for the Rocky movie, I think he worked out with him back then. If I'm not wrong.
I mean, obviously, Franco Colombo did not have any unique methods of training. He used what everybody else was using, right? He did deadlifts, he did parallel bar dips, he did bench press, he did everything everyone did. So whatever information he passed on to Sylvester Stallone was just the conventional wisdom. It was not the Franco method. It was just the conventional wisdom. And the conventional wisdom has been in place for so long that is largely the reason why so many people think that the conventional wisdom, the conventional methods must be the best way, must be the only way. Heaven forbid, sacrilegious, that you say something against an overhead press. And of course, anyone with an open mind and common sense who sees the 5 mechanical problems that I explain with an overhead press can say, well, yeah, that's obviously not deniable. And well, yeah, I can see that the position of the muscle has now shifted away from the direction of resistance. And I can see that, the degree of arm rotation required is extreme. And I can see the impingement I can see it. I can understand it logically. Anyone who, is willing to listen can't deny that many of these conventional exercises have very obvious problems. But again, it was like with Rick Drayson, once you've invested your energy, once you've, suffered the consequences. And let's say you bench press 400 pounds, it's going to be difficult for you to admit then that I injured myself for nothing, or that, I worked harder than I had to work. Everyone knows this is a famous quote from Ronnie Coleman. They ask him, do you have any regrets? And instead of saying, yes, I regret that I did exercises that were mechanically, less than ideal. Of course, he doesn't even know that. He says, yes, the regret I have is that I squatted only 2 reps with 800 pounds instead of 5, that I didn't go for the 5. It's like, right? Well, that's a lot of bravado, right? That's a lot of machismo. That's a lot of, something that, he knows people love to hear. The idea that, giving it all you got is the secret to success. Well, giving it all you got when what you're doing is compromised is not as smart as giving it all you got with something that is more targeted, more precise, right?
It's kind of encouraging people to also go, once they get injured, they should go there because he said it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously when he says what he says, he's encouraging 2 things. He's encouraging working beyond human, limits, and he's also encouraging barbell squat.
Yeah.
Right? And I would say, as I've said many times, squatting body weight is fine. Squatting body weight does not jeopardize your spine. Once you start putting 200, 300, 400, 600, 800 pounds on your spine, you are jeopardizing your spine. And so at that point, the cost is dramatically rising. And so you need to ask yourself, is the reward dramatically rising, right? And what you realize is that the cost is increasing at a faster rate than the reward. And the cost reward ratio is getting skewed towards something that is, if you were going to compare it to an investment, investing $1 million is something that's only going to give you a $20 reward, right? So, right, it's just not worth it. Which is not to say that it's not worth pursuing that amount of muscle. It's just that amount of muscle can be achieved a better way.
Right. Now we're going to talk about something that has nothing to do with biomechanics and resistance exercise.
Okay.
Something different. Okay.
Okay.
There are people who don't like what you're saying about training, or in general, something that they don't agree with you about. So they just don't like you for that, especially if you have a good argument and you have, let's say, you know how to back up your information, what you're saying. So that creates haters, and haters manifest in different ways. In, let's say, creating a video where you're dissecting a simple movement, people click dislike, bad commenting, just hate. So I want to ask you, what is hate, first of all, before we get to those things? What is hate, in your opinion?
I guess you could just say that hate is something that makes you very, very, very unhappy because they say something very different than what you say, or, maybe, and this is relative too, because there are people that have been doing exercises that I've been able to dissect and say, this is a very, very compromised exercise, meaning that it's potentially very dangerous or potentially very compromised in benefit. And we'll just take deadlift, for example. And there are people out there who have largely based their identity on not only doing that exercise ritualistically, and I'll explain what I mean by that, and also teaching it. So they are very invested in their reputation, the fact that they have taught hundreds, maybe thousands of people something that I suggest isn't so good. Well, that person is then faced with this situation where if the people that they've been teaching hear my explanation of things, they're going to then think or believe or know that the person who taught them this other thing didn't really know what they were saying. And the thought of that is obviously very threatening to the person that taught him that, right? So the impulse is to hate, right? The impulse is to say, well, Brignole doesn't know what he's talking about, or Brignole's an idiot, or Brignole's lying to you, or Brignole's, trying to commercialize something. Look, this is in politics and religion too, right? This is everywhere. When I see people teaching something that I don't agree with, I don't hate them, right? I just say, well, I don't agree with it, but I don't make it a mission to attack them. I don't make it a mission to go to their site and give them a thumbs down. I don't make it a mission to tell people that person is misleading them. We analyze exercises. We analyze, and so we might indirectly say, if anyone told you to do this, you should, never mind the person, you should reevaluate the exercise. For example, last time we looked at the T-bar row.
Yeah.
And, one obvious thing that you'd have to understand just logically is the lats originate on the lower part of the spine and connect to the upper arm bone, which means that when the muscle origins are pulling on their limb, they're going to pull in a downward direction. T-bar row, especially if you're mostly vertical, mostly standing, are pulling upward. You're not pulling downward. You're not pulling toward the origin of those muscles, right? So not to mention the fact that, your erector spinae doesn't have to be involved in pulling the lats. If you're pulling down, if you're doing a lat pull down, the erector spinae isn't having to resist a downward pulling on your torso.
Yeah.
Right. Well, when you're doing a T-bar row and you're mostly vertical, it is. And if you round your back, then of course the injury risk goes way up because you could be herniating a disc. These are mechanical analysis. So if you happen to be a person who was recommending T-bar row, and you're going to hate me because I've analyzed the mechanics, the physics of a T-bar row in a way that doesn't support what you've been saying, it's possible that you could hate me. So my tendency is to want to apologize, but there's nothing to apologize for. I'm just doing what an expert is supposed to do. It's supposed to apply the expertise to the thing, that he's analyzing, and explain and show people, because our goal is to help people, right? And no matter what you do, whenever you try to help people, there's always going to be some people that are going to disagree with you. It's just the way it is. And I would just say, I don't tell people to not do a T-bar row. I don't tell people to not do what these other people are telling you to do. What I say, just the opposite. Try their way, try our way, and then you decide. Yeah. Or just think about it and decide which one makes the most sense to you, right? But we're looking at this very logically. We're not looking at this thing emotionally. And to some degree, it's a dog-eat-dog world, and to some degree, people are competing. And if they're trying to get a business advantage, then they would ideally like to be the only one giving the right information, right?
It's true.
Or the only one giving any information, whether it's right or not. And so naturally people compete. I mean, throughout history, there's always been, methods of sabotage, methods of trying to hurt your rivals so that, your customers won't be distracted by what the rival is saying.
And do you think the person who, you said it's a pulse that, like, the first thing they will do, they will hate, right? So do you think, like, it can't be a choice? Because let's say if your awareness is, like, let's say I'm educated and I know how people work and how things work, then I'll know that why I should be emotional about that, why I should take it as a hate. Why don't I learn more about that thing, and go more in depth and study it instead of become emotional?
Well, that's a very good question. Let's just say that I am in teaching physics, biomechanics, and which, by the way, this has happened. And someone says, well, you're ignoring so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so. And I go, okay. And if I don't understand what they said, I'll research it. And I have, throughout the years, modified what I said. I've gained from someone disagreeing with me. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone who disagrees with me is knowledgeable. right? Some people disagree with me have no knowledge. Some people who disagree with me have knowledge. Naturally, the more knowledgeable I get, the fewer people there will be who can disagree with me from a knowledge base.
Yeah.
Right. For example, I'll give you an example. Once upon a time, I didn't know about bilateral deficit. Someone brought that to my attention. I learned from it. I added it to my repertoire. I improved my knowledge base. Right. I didn't hate them for saying, you're ignoring bilateral deficit. Right. So there's no productive value to hate.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're hearing something that is different than what you're saying, you have two options: learn from it or dismiss it.
It's true.
Simple as that. You can learn from it. You can say, "Oh, that's interesting. I'm not gonna." Or, I mean, look, you know as well as I do, maybe better, because you're always looking for content for our videos, and so we see a lot of people out there doing things that are crazy, right? That are literally make no sense. But we don't hate them. We don't attack them, right? I mean, what we know is that other people are seeing the exercises that are being demonstrated that are crazy. And then we say, okay, so how do we do something productive with this? How do we keep people from getting injured from that? How do we get people from being misled and wasting energy by following that advice? So then we might show an exercise that they were showing, and we might say, here's an exercise that some people do, or that's been recommended, and we're going to dissect it, and we're going to show the direction of resistance. We're going to show, the direction of anatomical motion that muscle produces, and we're going to let viewers know the degree of benefit or lack of benefit, the degree of injury or risk of injury, and so that we can provide information. That's what we are. We're an information source. And that's all. But there's really nothing productive about hate, and it's too bad that it exists in the world.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, is there anything productive about hate? Because sometimes people say, if you don't have enough haters, you're not successful enough.
Well, I'm not. I don't look at it from the perspective that the more haters I have, the more successful I am. I don't look at it from, I just look at it from the perspective that every single argument in the world has people that are for and against everything. I mean, you can look at any commercial on TV and you'll find people that agree and people who that disagree. Any philosophy, you could say that, the sky is blue and some people will say it's not. Some people will say everything's an illusion. And there's naysayers. There's people that are contrarians. That is their, brain wiring. They are people that always play what they call devil's advocate. They always try to take the opposite position. And there's also another thing that's sort of interesting. What I've noticed over the years is that a lot of people like being teachers. And so they take the position of being a teacher or a preacher or a lecturer, because they'd rather be perceived as someone who knows rather than someone who's learning. Mm-hmm. And that's especially true if you have put yourself in a position where you're trying to sell information, where you're putting yourself in a position as teacher, then obviously you don't want to be perceived as someone who's learning. You're supposed to be perceived, or you want your clients or your audience to perceive you as someone who already knows all there is to know. Heaven forbid you not know everything. But look, I think Tom Purvis is fantastic. Tom Purvis, was one of my early examples of biomechanics and physics, guidance in terms of resistance exercise. But I'm sure that Tom Purvis would be the first person to admit if he was introduced a concept that he was unfamiliar with or didn't know, right? This is how experts are supposed to be. Any good scientist. And we could look at, Neil deGrasse Tyson. We could look at anybody that, is out in the science world today. And the first thing they'll tell you is a good scientist, a good teacher is always ready for new information, is always receptive, right? We teach what we teach based on the information we have, based on the knowledge we have. But if something comes along that presents new information that allows us to see something differently or, you know, that is brand new. None of us can be too proud to change our perspective.
Yeah.
None of us. And anyone who says, no, I'm 100% right. And I can't, I will never change my view regardless of what's presented. I'll give you an example. You know, I was, you know, saying that I still say that the farmer carry is a very inefficient exercise, and efficiency is measured on percentage basis of load, right? So we know that any limb that is perpendicular to gravity, meaning if you're dealing with free weight gravity, it's horizontal. Any forearm, any upper arm bone, any lower leg bone, any upper leg bone, any torso, any foot, any hand that is horizontal is going to load that muscle more than if those limbs are vertical. And when you're doing a farmer carry, your forearms are mostly vertical, your upper arms are mostly vertical, your thighs, thigh bone, your femur, your lower legs, vertical, your torso vertical, right? So all the muscles that are controlling those vertical limbs are not getting much in terms of percentage of what you're carrying. The clavicles are horizontal, so they're loading the trapezius. The feet are horizontal, so the calves are being loaded. The fingers are horizontal because they're wrapping underneath the thing, so the grip is being loaded. But, you know, there are people that would get angry at me for saying that farmer carry is an inefficient way of loading. Well, ask an engineer. Ask anyone who knows physics. I mean, this is just, physics doesn't lie. I mean, we know we can quantify, we can actually assign percentages of load and actual weights, right? And someone says, well, farmer carry is the best thing for the traps. Well, the direction of resistance of a farmer carry is the same direction of resistance you would use in a shrug. And a shrug would be full range of motion. So naturally, a shrug would be a better exercise than being stagnant and just holding resistance, right? So yes, it's the right direction of resistance for the traps, but it's not full range of motion, so it can't possibly be as good as shrugs. So this is what we're talking about, and that's why I always try to be very clear in saying that I'm not saying that barbell squats doesn't work. I'm saying that it works to this degree, but not to that degree. Right. It's percentages, right? And when you're saying, is it a good exercise or not, it's not black and white. It's not good compared to this, and this, because these load the muscle more with less wasted energy and less risk of injury. So that should be the way we evaluate exercise. What gives you more muscle load while using less weight, so therefore less skeletal strain and less risk of injury? That would be considered better. That's what we're trying to recommend, is what is better, not necessarily black and white.
So don't hate us for that.
Don't hate us for that. We're shining a spotlight on something, and then we hope that it, you know, clarifies things for you. And as you know, we've got lots and lots of people who've sent us, you know, wonderful messages and emails saying, this makes the most sense of anything I've ever used. Finally, I'm able to work out again, pain-free. Finally, my joints don't hurt anymore. I had some guy, we saw it on Instagram, show us what a magnificent upper pectoral development he was getting with decline dumbbell presses, with no shoulder pain. And that he's done away now with the incline presses because he understands the lack of logic of moving a limb in a direction where the target muscle origins don't exist, aren't situated.
Well, thank you, Doug, for this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Send us your questions and thoughts in the comment section. And we will see you in the next video. Don't forget to check out also all the links in the video description. Thank you very much, Doug. I'll see you in the next video.
Bye, guys. Thank you.